And today I'm with Michael Vannoy Adams. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you, John. I'm happy to be here.
Michael, today we are talking about images and the imagination within Jungian psychology. And three of your books have had imagination in the title or the subtitle. So why is it that imagination is so important to you? And can we start there?
Well, to me, the thing that separates Jungian psychology from all of the other forms of psychoanalysis um, is its emphasis on images and the imagination. And some years ago, there was a book. I mean, there are many different kinds of psychoanalysis, so-called, and many years ago, there was a book by a New York psychoanalyst, Fred Pine, an analyst in the Freudian tradition, and he wrote a book. It was called Drive, Ego, Object, Self. It had those four words were the title. Drive, comma, ego, comma, object, comma, self. And he was referring to what he thought of as the four basic types of psychoanalysis in the Freudian tradition. The first phase of that was Freud's own drive or id psychology. And then after that, there was ego psychology. And then after that, there was object relations psychology. And then after that, there was self psychology. So it was those were the four phases according to Fred Pine. And at that time, I thought, well, okay, the Jungian one is, if there was going to be a fifth word in that row, it would be image. And that would be what the Jungians are emphasizing. At least that's the way I see it. One could say it's an archetype or archetypal psychology. I call it an imaginal psychology. And we'll get into, I guess, why that adjective imaginal might be an important word for Jungians and other people to be aware of. So images and what images are and what role they play and why they're so important in Jungian psychology is really what I think we're talking about tonight. So I
Michael,
could tell you.
I think just before we get underway, I think, for the layperson on the street, as soon as you think of psychology, you think of neurosis half the time. It's like, well, people go to a psychologist, they help fix their neurosis and all of that. Whereas it is a different emphasis, isn't it? Like the imagination. So you're saying to be a therapist is to be intimately involved with the imagination, the imaginal life.
I'm saying to be what I would think of as a Jungian psychotherapist or Jungian psychoanalyst. You really aren't one unless the imagination and images are not at the center of your activity. You're something else if something else is at the center. And now, again, I'm saying that one might decide, well, archetypes, because archetypes are not images, they are something else. And so you could say I've built a psychology on the anima or other kinds of concepts like that, or the persona or the trickster, or you could have all sorts of ideas like that. And you could say that's how I understand Jungian psychology to be. But to me, the images and the imagination. And I think you're saying something here about neuroses as is that a lot of psychoanalysis deals with pathology or negativity or some kind of ailment you have or a condition you have, and it emphasizes that. Whereas imagination, one of the understandings of imagination is that it's about possibility. And so or creativity in some way, that there's some connotation of the imagination like that. So it's more positive in some way than pathological. It holds out some kind of hope. the imagination. So that's in the mix as well. I'll tell you, if you were like me some years ago and you had a daughter who was at New York University and she was taking a psychology course, a Psychology 101 course, and she brought her textbook home. You know, if you want to make a lot of money, what you do is you write a textbook or you co-author it with some other people, and then it goes through many different editions in one of these basic introductory courses. And so lots and lots of people across the United States buy your textbook. And so it's one of these big books like that. I mean, you could barely lug it around. It was so heavy. And so I just picked the thing up and took a peek into the index, and I looked up image. And what came up was fMRI, the functional magnetic resonance image. So I flipped to that page, and what they have in the book as an illustration of an image is a brain scan.
Right.
See, that's where we've come to in academic psychology these days. If you were to say, what is an image, they would show you a brain scan. Now that is so far removed from what I understand an image or the imagination to be. I can't even begin to, I don't know, even think of how to address. How would you have a conversation with the people who are doing, well, I mean, see, this is turning psychology into neurology or into so-called neuroscience on one level. Psychology only started about 1879 in Germany with Wilhelm Wundt and his first psychology laboratory. So we haven't even had, I think, 150 years or so of psychology yet. And now it's already being, there's competition. It might be replaced with something else just any minute. But certainly the idea of images has turned into something that would be unrecognizable to Carl Jung. He wouldn't think it. Now, I would have to say that there, on the one hand, you've got a brain scan as the image, and then you've got, one of my heroes, William Blake, and what he said as a romantic poet in the early 19th century was something radically different. He said, the imagination is not a state, it is the human condition, it's the human existence itself. Not the human condition, but the human existence itself. Existentially, humans are works of imagination, or they're imaginers, is what Blake is saying. So it's an exalted position for images in the imagination in Blake. And it couldn't be any further from a functional magnetic resonance image. And so that's a long passage to come to where we are now. And I would say
William Blake is one of those rare people. I don't know. There's people that pop up through history, and then William Blake is this beacon of the imagination. He's just such a likable character to me because he's so peculiar, and his offering to the world is so linked to the imagination.
Well, in his poetry, he had imagination that way, images in his poetry, and then he also obviously was a printer and engraver, and he was a visual artist as well as a verbal artist, and so he did two kinds of images in the most amazing way. There's a problem with images in the West that makes the Jungian emphasis on images in the imagination all that more important. Matthew Arnold wrote a book in, I think it was published in 1869, called Culture and Anarchy. And Arnold asserted that there were two foundations to Western civilization. One was the Hellenic or Greek or Greco-Roman, and the other was the Hebraic or the Jewish or Judeo-Christian traditions. And when I think about the imagination, both of those traditions make images in the imagination problematic. I'll try to explain a little bit about what I mean there. Um, in Islam, which is part of that Middle Eastern religious complex, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you have in Iran or in Persia, this is now Shiite Islam and not Wahhabi Islam. It's not Arabian Islam, it's Persian Islam. In Persia, you have three levels of reality. In the West, in the Western philosophical tradition, you only have two. And now we're not talking about William Blake as a Neoplatonist, where he has the imagination in there, but we're talking about Plato or Socrates. We're talking about plain Platonism. In the Platonic Western Hellenic tradition, you have two levels of reality, the ideal and the real, or the spiritual and the material. You do not have a level of the imagination. You have ideas, ideals and reals, and you have it's a two-dimensional reality. But in Persian mysticism or Persian Shiite Islam, you have three levels of reality. You have the ideal or spiritual, and you have the real or the material, but in between them, you have a middle level, which is the imaginal level. And this is what is the Alam al-Mital. That's what it's called. And this is the level of reality that the great Shiite historian Henry Corbin emphasizes. And Corbin, of course, was very important to Carl Jung at Eranos and places like that. So you have a three-dimensional reality in Persian Islam or Sufism or Shiite Islam, whereas in the West, we have a two-dimensional reality. We don't have the imagination as a level.
Can I just ask a question about that, Michael? Is firstly, I don't know, like Henry Corbin, firstly, it seems I remember reading he started because he couldn't translate the word imaginary in English. He didn't like it, and he started using the word imaginal. So it seems that what a lot of people have taken from Henry Corbin is the value he's given to imagination by showing this third thing that you're talking about, the imaginal reality, rather than in the West where we may just say imaginary. Like we could say, well, that person's a bit of a dreamer. They're a little bit imaginary. We kind of look down on it, don't we? Maybe. But there's another point, and maybe you could address both of these, is you're talking about Sufism, and I immediately think of Rumi, the way he used images, or Hafez, or whatever. But getting back to your earlier point about religion, and this might be a little bit of a crude way to put it, but in Islam and Judaic and Christianity, it seems to me they wanted to, in the formal side of the religion, the orthodox side of those religions, they kind of wanted to stamp out the individual imagination a little, didn't they? Because it was problematic. There's some distinction to make between the original Sufism, the original Islam that seems to me Henry Corbin makes, but what the actual religions have done, because they didn't want people to open that heretical box of the imagination, because then they would become heretics.
But what I'm really saying is that in a Hellenic tradition or the Greek tradition, you have this two-dimensional model. Instead of a three-dimensional model, you omit the imagination until you get Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism then brings the imagination in. But Platonism or Socrates, they just have a two-dimensional model, the ideal and the real. There is no imaginal level there. So Blake is a Neoplatonist. These other people who come in later, they bring the imagination into the equation and they make a three-dimensional Western model. But before that, it's just two-dimensional through the Greeks. through the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims, you except for Persia, but in the Orthodox, you were talking about the second commandment in the Bible. And the second of the Ten Commandments says it's a comprehensive injunction that prohibits the making of images of anything, and now I'm going to quote, that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Now that takes care of everything. You can't make an image of anything. And so the reason why this prohibition exists, it seems to me, is that there was a realization very early on that images exert much more of an immediate impact on us than, say, words do. So in Jewish tradition, or more inclusively, the Middle Eastern monotheisms, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the prohibition against images is a stricture against idols. That's what you're talking about. Imagery is tantamount to idolatry.
What does idolatry actually mean?
Well, it just means, I mean, it's just another word for imagery in this thing, because images are presumed to have much more of an immediate impact on us than, say, words do. Words obviously can influence, but an image, it's like a picture is worth 1,000 words, something like that. An image has more influence on us, and so it is more problematic, or it might be more dangerous. You can identify with it, and you to the exclusion of other things, and it will take you away from I don't know, the requisite level of abstraction. And so something like, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, we have cancel culture now where you can't say certain things, you know.
Yeah.
But the original cancel culture, or the cancel culture from a long time ago, on the basis of what you're saying, was with images.
Well,
that was
right.
the first cancel culture.
Yeah, it's Passover right now, and so we're in a period where people are talking about Moses and the departure from Egypt and all of these kinds of things, and part of that is the golden calf in the desert. Suddenly, Aaron, his brother, is down there building an idol in the desert in there trying to get to the promised land. Moses is up on the mountaintop. He's bringing those commandments down. And the second one of the first commandment is not make any images of God. The second commandment is more comprehensive. It's you can't make an image of anything. And so because the images are more powerful, and if you're confronted with an image, then you will get carried away. You will actually completely lose control, and you'll be in the grip of the image, and that's that.
And you will. If you dreamt
well,
if I dreamt of a snake last night, I'll wake up and I'll be in the power of that snake.
Well, Satan or something, okay? The golden calf. Muhammad, when he wins all of his military battles and he enters Mecca with his army, he goes to the Kaaba, and the Kaaba has 360 idols or images standing around it, the 360 degrees of the full circle. There's one idol for each degree. This means that idols are everywhere. At the moment that he enters Mecca with his army, that's the sad state of affairs, of total idolatry in Mecca. And so he rides up on his horse and he pulls out his sword, because he's the great warrior prophet. He pulls out his sword and he points his sword at these idols the way you would point something like a magic wand. And as he points it at each idol, they all keel over backwards. See, so there you have the great prophet of Islam coming in and putting an end to idolatry at the Kaaba in Mecca. And then later you get Oliver Cromwell in England. I have been taken by the philosopher of science Michael Vannoy into the chapel at Merton College of Oxford, where he showed me the stained glass that's in Merton. It's some of the only stained glass that survived Oliver Cromwell and his Roundheads, his Puritans, or we would call them skinheads these days. The skinheads came to town and they broke all of the stained glass in Oxford, except for some that was hidden away down in the basement or somewhere to keep the Puritans from smashing all of the images. Iconoclasm means image smashing, and that's what happened with the Puritans. It's the same thing as Muhammad was doing in Mecca. Cromwell comes to Oxford or whatever, and so now I remember very well the Methodist church in my hometown when I was a very small child. It was a red brick church. It was a bit of a round building, and it had stained glass in there, which was representational. It had images of scenes from the Bible, Jonah and the whale, and all these different kinds of scenes. They were aids to learning the Bible stories. And there they were in beautiful stained glass in the church. Everybody sitting there during the sermon. If they were bored to death by the sermon, they could look at the beautiful stained glass. Well, at some point, and there were ceiling fans in that church. But then at some point, the Methodists in my hometown decided they needed air conditioning. So they needed a new church building, and they demolished the red brick building and built a pink brick building, not round anymore, but elongated. And then they had stained glass in the new building, but guess what kind of stained glass it was? It would not have been out of place with the abstract expressionists in New York. This was about 1960. They were basically shards of glass, no scenes from the Bible anymore, no representational thing, but abstract expressionists,
That's
different.
it's very sad. It's that
It's shocking.
it's look, I don't know, Michael. I know Hillman talks about the pandemonium of images, and he says with Jung, to know thyself is to know those images, know thy images. But I can see this Puritan flavour that we think, we're over all that religious stuff, but it continues on in some, or it means don't worship images unless you worship my images somehow. That seems to be the hidden message somewhere. But then there's this lack of richness, of vitality, of life, as William Blake might call it, of the imaginal. That
Well, I
we've
hope, John, that you're
brought
not
ourselves to.
encouraging. I hope that you're not encouraging people to be impure on your
Yes,
podcast.
yes, I am. This is the pandemonium of images podcast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those are the two things that we have historically to contend with down to the present day. We have these two traditions. One, which is just two-dimensional and doesn't have the third dimension of the imagination in it. So it's hard to bring that in and keep reminding everybody that there's a third position between the ideal and the real. And I mean, there you see there, the ideal is the pure. You see what I'm saying? The real would be the impure, but in the middle is the imagination in some way. But we just haven't had that coming out of the Greek tradition. And then in the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic tradition, we've had this iconoclasm or image smashing tradition. We just can't. It's prohibiting them. It's not just an absence; it's an active prohibition.
I want to take you up though. You can tell me off if you want to, but you're saying in the ancient Greek world, like I remember going to the port city outside of Rome, Ostia, right? And what struck me, what got me, was that in those days people used to have images of the gods and the goddesses out the front in the courtyard. So you had your favourite image, and in Greece, we know that there were many gods and goddesses, right? So, and the Romans took from there or whatever. But so it's like people did worship images.
Well, you're talking about mythological Greece versus philosophical Greece.
Right.
And obviously mythological Greece is before philosophical Greece. But I'm saying that when you get Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and all of this, then you begin to demythologize and you begin to problematize the imagination. or it begins the images become suspect. It's like Plato is well known for being suspicious of art and other kinds of things. He believes that they are at a remove from reality. You see, they become figments or fictions or something that is dubious, and so you are no longer living in the real active world of Greek mythology. It's not a mythos anymore. It's a Sophia, the study of you know it's the love of wisdom, or the love of Sophia, that replaces the imagination in some way. I believe is what there's one way you could look at it. So there
You
are
could
two
look. You
Greeks.
could also look at it through power too, couldn't you? I mean, elitism is getting control of the images. You could do that. You know, I mean, that's a pretty blunt way to put it.
Um, well, various things change over time, and various disciplines and ways of thinking and other things come in, and they dominate for a while and they exclude other things. And so some things get lost or de-emphasized. And I don't think that there's much one can do,
Mm.
to halt that kind of process. It seems to me that's just kind of the way life proceeds. But it's important to be aware of what's going on, and what seems to be receding, and what seems to be coming into the foreground. And so I'm saying that when you get philosophy at that moment, the mythology and the images and the imagination, it takes a back seat to the philosophical categories of that time.
Mm.
And the imagination somehow, I mean, it's not, it just falls out of sight, I think, in some way. In the Middle Eastern tradition, there's an active opposition to it, because um, people are their gods, because their God is abstract, their God is transcendent, their God there is no image. In fact, for you to have an image of the God, that's the first commandment. You should not have any image of the
Yeah,
God.
yeah.
The God is abstract and
Mm.
transcendent to any of
Mm.
the creation. So it's blasphemous or sinful for you to represent God in any form or fashion. So
I,
and then
I saw a picture. I mean, I don't want to go too much into this, but I saw a story in the US where a woman who was a lecturer at a university, Islamic, brought in a picture of Muhammad that she had drawn, and she lost her job. So, but I mean, she double blasphemed because she had a picture of Muhammad and she took it to the university. So it's kind of like, but Michael, I'm interested. If I could, I just ask you one question. Like, how did you first get onto this? That this theme in your life of the imagination. I want to ask you two things. When did you know that imagination was such a critical thing to you personally, or a driving force, or whatever? And secondly, how have you noticed this with your patients, with your clients, within therapy? Can you tell us a bit about all of that?
well, sure. Well, in my essay that I wrote, "For Love of the Imagination," it's a bit of an autobiographical um, piece. I wrote it originally at the invitation of a man who was editing a book called "Why I Became a Psychotherapist," and so that's why I wrote autobiographically in a way. And as a child, I lived in what I think of as a world of imagination, partly through nature, living in a nursery. My father, with his as a horticulturalist, and with flowers and plants and trees and all that. And then that was one side of the family, and then the other side was a 100-acre farm with a railroad across it and a highway across it, and Indian arrowheads there, and all sorts of other things, and milking cows. And so I had a very, very rich experience of of a world full of images, and so I couldn't help that just the physical reality or the material reality around me was that way. And then my mother was also an artist, and she was a painter and a ceramicist and other kinds of things, a jewelry maker, and so I was introduced to people making art. I mean, she was an amateur artist and amateur art teacher, and for ladies and children and things of that sort. Um, so I had kind of a dose like that. And then there came a time in my life when I started doing other things, and that level of imagination as a child receded into the past. And it wasn't until college when I discovered Freudian psychoanalysis and psychoanalysis in general, and Jung eventually, that that was an opportunity for me to return to the imagination. So that's the little autobiographical piece. The more I got into, I mean, Freud gave me a way into it, and then I began slowly but surely to appreciate why Jung, in terms of imagination, was so much more important. And so maybe that brings me to sort of say a couple of things about, well, I just, we've contrasted the background here where images in these two traditions have kind of, the imagination has not been so important in Western civilization in a certain way. But when you get to Jung, I'll just read you four little one-liners from Jung. One, we live immediately only in the world of images. Two, every psychic process is an image and an imaging. Three, the psyche consists essentially of images. And four, the big one, image is psyche. Now you see, those are powerful statements that extol the virtues of the imagination and exalt the imagination as the very essence of psychology. The psyche is images, or the imagination. It's not that the imagination is one of the faculties of the psyche, like reason is one and imagination is another, and you've got a whole list of faculties. It's not a faculty, it is the psyche. That's what Jung is saying. That's a huge claim against smashing images or leaving them out of the equation. He brings them back in full force, and he talks about them as if they're the most important thing in the world. And then you get James Hillman, and I'm going to do the same thing with James, if you'll permit me. James, in his books, in Revisioning Psychology, he says, in the beginning is the image. Now, this is James playing around and having some fun because, of course, that's a direct reference, an allusion to the King James Bible and into John 1:1, where it says, in the beginning was the Word. Yeah. James is saying, no, it's not the word that's important, it's the image that's important. So he's redefining God. In fact, he's committing a sin there, or he's being blasphemous, or he's being impure by saying, no, it's not the word. And James is a nice Jewish boy. I mean, he liked to laugh about that and all that sort of thing.
Well, not so nice, not such a nice Jewish boy as it turns out.
But I'm saying he is he's like the little boy who's gone down to the temple and he's reading everybody the riot act. He's saying, no, I'm bringing images back in. The word is not the beginning, the image is the beginning. Yeah. And this gets you in trouble if you're not careful. Then he says psychoanalysis or psychotherapy works. He's like Abraham Lincoln here, of the people, by the people, and for the people. This is like James's Gettysburg Address. He does it a couple of times, that psychoanalysis works in imagination, with imagination, and for imagination. See, I don't know I think you've got to be an American refighting the Civil War somehow to phrase things like that way in a series. Then he says, dreams call from the imagination to the imagination, and can be answered only by the imagination. And then the last one, the images are where the psyche is. See, this is very much like Jung saying, image is psyche. The images are where the psyche is. And then he says, we humans are primarily acts of imagination, images. Human beings are primarily images. Now, see, put Jung and Hillman together there. I mean, that's like an antidote to all of that preceding stuff about neglecting images or prohibiting images. They bring the images and imagination back full force to the center of everything. So imagination is an interesting word. It's got a different kind of feeling to me to it than if you say the imagination. If you say imagination, that seems to me a broader, a freer, and more an invitation to possibility than if you talk about the imagination. That seems more restrictive. And then you talk about these adjectives, which you were talking about, way back to Henry Corbin and the imaginal. He writes this essay that Hillman publishes in Spring Annual, an annual of archetypal psychology and Jungian thought. He publishes Corbin's famous essay on the imaginal. You have this adjective imaginative, and the connotation there is creative. If you're imaginative, you're creative. And that's a very positive connotation. And then you've got this adjective, which is imaginary. And the connotation there is unreal. And so you have a negative connotation.
Dubious.
But then what Corbin does, he brings in this third adjective as an alternative, the imaginal, which it gives you a neutral word to use. It's not positive or negative. It just means of images and the imagination. So our psychology as an imaginal psychology is a psychology that emphasizes images and the imagination. And they might be creative, they might be destructive. They might be real, they might be unreal.
We could get carried, to be a little bit fairer to organized religion. I mean, people may have got carried away by images throughout history, and we can get carried away from images, can't we? So it's kind of like there might have been in my language, some kind of safety reason why people, to look at it nicely in a positive light, there's some safety reason, because if human beings couldn't discern, they could just be carried away by images.
Well, that's the logic, or that's the excuse given for suppressing or repressing.
Well, the question is, or the thing is suppression the answer to that, or is working with the images, understanding the images, knowing images the answer?
Well, I always say something like this. This is one of my little aphorisms. It's that consciousness trumps rules or laws. And you see, a law or a rule is a shorthand. It's like a slogan. It's like a little condensed thing that you can memorize. Like you can memorize the 10 Commandments. They're not bad rules of thumb. I mean, the problem with the law, it admits of no mitigating circumstances. It's just the law, and that's that. And Billy Budd Melville's novel about Billy Budd, who hits the man in the jaw and kills him with one blow, not intending to. But then, since he's in the Navy and Navy justice is this way, and it's the law, and if you do this, then you're hanged. See, you can't. There's no argument. You can't say, oh, there's an ambiguity here, or I didn't mean to, or it's just that, well, that's the law, and that's too bad, and you're executed. And so the problem with the law, the consciousness gives you some kind of a kind of a choice in the matter. The law is very heavy-handed. By design. And so you just memorize it and apply it, and you follow it and you obey it, or you obey or you're punished. You see, and so this other way of looking at things complicates that situation. For people who can afford to do analysis or whatever,
Yeah.
or want to make the commitment and are serious about themselves and want to enhance the quality of their consciousness or transform their consciousness, then it's vastly superior to, because then you're into a self-help book, which is a recipe by Dr. Phil or somebody, the 10 ways to please your wife, or some kind of a rule book like that.
Have you got that one at home? I'm just
Well,
asking for a friend.
it's not bad to have one or two of these things on your shelf, but what I'm saying is, from the psychoanalytic standpoint, whether it's Freudian or Jungian, we're betting our money on working on our consciousness. For one thing, these are generalizations. These are abstract generalizations, and the images that are coming to us in our own dreams. See, we're trusting the image that comes to you in your own dream. We're assuming that the psyche is tailor-made to you. It's not off the rack like the 10 Commandments.
Yeah,
you buy
that's
that
it.
book, you memorize it, and then you live according to the fourfold path of Buddhism.
Yeah.
See, Jungian psychology or Jungian psychoanalysis and Freudian psychoanalysis at their best are not formulaic.
Well, they can get that way sometimes, Michael, to be honest, but I think it's because people carry
I
that
said
old
at their
stuff.
best, okay?
Yes. What happens is all of what you've been talking about, the rule book, the kind of formula that's handed down, the shorthand version, which is a bit paternalistic, by the way, like you can understand it when people think like that. It is
Well, it's
can be
paternalistic
carried in, can be
it's
carried into Jungian
paternalistic
psychology.
it's paternalistic or maternalistic. It's either big daddy or big mama.
Yeah,
It's
true. Yeah,
it's any group any demographic that's in control.
yeah,
They have got their 10 commandments they're going to inflict on you. They've got this is the problem. You see, this is the problem. The problem is whether you want to and are in a position to try to think and act
yeah,
independently and individually. This is what individuation is about.
yeah,
Jung contrasts individuation with imitation. And so if you're just memorizing some rules, you're just
yeah,
imitating. This is
yeah,
it's a collective thing instead of an individual thing.
yeah,
You are not exercising your own individual agency and autonomy. You're relying on a set of sayings
yeah.
or a rule book.
Or
And as
slogans,
I'm
slogans, we could use that word.
Well, yes, slogans like it's early bird gets the worm or some other kind of thing like this. I mean,
Isn't that
Benjamin.
true?
Oh,
I,
yes, it
I,
is. Benjamin Franklin. Well, you see, out of my ethnic background and all that, Ben Franklin isn't half bad with some of the things he's saying about getting up and getting to work, and not
yeah, yeah,
blaming everybody else. And
yeah,
I subscribe to some of these things, but I want to try them out in my own life and see whether I think whether they hold any water or not. You
yeah.
see, the people who are just legalistic about this, they want to memorize a formula and then there's ready to go.
It's
And they are
rote learning in primary school,
well, yeah, they're
without
not
the
questioning that.
intelligence of discerning. Someone was saying the other day that there's so much within religious, mystical literature about the ability to discern. So it seems to me that it's not just the heart and the loving heart, although, of course, that's an incredibly important thing, but this ability to stay with images, discern images, work with images, which is kind of what Hillman says when he talks about soul making. It's kind of like there's a discernment required in all of that.
Let me do something here or suggest something to you at this point,
Yeah,
because we've gone a pretty good distance with our time now,
yeah.
and we've
You want
talked
to
about
stop?
these traditions and we've sort of set a background for thinking about some things. But there's some other very important things to talk about, which is sticking to the image as a Jungian method.
Yeah.
We're certainly not going to get around to talking about active imagination tonight, but there's some James Hillman's notions and Jung's notions about images versus symbols, or images versus concepts, or images versus objects. We talked a little bit about images versus words, but the images are also contrasted within Jungian psychology with some other very powerful words. And I don't think we're going to get around to do that adequately tonight. And so I don't think we ought to try, because I think it will just fail if we do. There won't be enough time for it. But what might be interesting would be to take an image or two, an actual image, and we kind of work with that or play with that for a little while here, and to give a little concrete examples of things.
Well, I would like to raise my hand for the snake. Firstly, because it is such a powerful image. And I know I took a lot from reading perhaps Hillman, in the sense of, if you have a dream of the snake, stay with it, kind of feel it, sense it, stay with that image, because what might happen is we jump off into trying to interpret it. Some people might say it's a good image to have. Some people might say it's a bad image, but stay with it. And if one stays with it, one will see how powerful an image is, or sense how powerful an image is. That's my 2 bobs worth.
Well, there's an interesting question about whether, say, snake is an image or a concept. You see? Now, what's the most poisonous snake in Australia?
The dugite. Do you have them in New York? Dugites?
Not up here
Out
on the
on the
Upper West
street?
Side. I'll look and check them out. But
They can kill you. A brown snake can kill you within about
yeah,
3
I
seconds.
know. The reason I ask is I'm way ahead of you, and I'm anticipating I've read your mind in advance. I'm just letting you know I have these special powers. And
Right.
so before we started talking
You're not
tonight,
the first.
I looked up on the internet and looked at Australian snakes, and I saw which is the most poisonous and all that sort of thing. I have to say that Texas snakes are much more poisonous. Okay, we've got you beat on that. I'm just letting you know. Okay, well, obviously not, but I mean, I put snake down at the very last, and that's the last thing that I wrote down on my list of notes and things for tonight was snake. And if we had the Jungian word association test and we gave snake as one of the 100 words, what do you think people would, what would be their
Full array. The full array.
What?
Some people, there'd be the full array of reactions to snake, and a massive instantaneous jump towards interpretation, whereas some people see it as a positive symbol in terms of the caduceus or something like that, a healing symbol. Some people see it as a negative symbol within their religious background. It just evokes powerful responses, reactions.
See, there you are getting us over into this area that I said we're not going to have time to talk about.
No, I know. We can talk about it.
Well, I'm teasing you, but I mean, so you're in the area of symbols or concepts, right? And you're saying like Hillman is talking about, you have a dream in which a particular snake comes to you.
Yeah.
And it looks a certain way, right? It's green, or it's in the water, or it's raised its head, or it's slithering, or it's being charmed, or it's a mongoose is fighting it, or there's some other kind of thing going on there, or it's doing its rattle. It's a rattlesnake. It's not a water moccasin. It's a rattlesnake. It's a diamondback rattlesnake. It has diamonds on its back. What about that? And what do we know you're supposed to do if I may say so, what is my name about again? Archetypally, Michael. See, I'm the man. I'm the
No
archangel
idea.
who's supposed. Well, the archangel who's supposed to come at the end of the world. You know, in the book of Revelations, I'm supposed to come, and I'm supposed to take my sword and kill that snake, who is the
Uh,
devil. Okay, that's the as James kept on saying, that's the final book of the Western Bible,
right.
and that's like where it's supposed to all end with Michael. Like I'm burdened with the first man, as Adams is my last name, and then the last guy is Michael here, slaying the devil or Satan in the form of a snake. Now St. George is doing it remotely with a spear on the back of a horse, but Michael is down there on the ground with a sword in hand, trying to kill the lizard or whatever you want to call him there underneath underfoot. Okay, so it's like from the Garden of Eden and Adam with the snake down all the way to Michael at the end of time with a sword killing it. So this is the heroism of the West, right? The dragon slaying or snake slaying hero. That's the primary myth of the West in that way. And so um, my mother, my mother was a Texan woman on the farm and all that. And she would invite little old ladies over to sit in her living room and all that. And then she would bring out a gallon mason jar with a lid on with the snake that she had killed out in the yard earlier in the day, beheaded with a hoe or something like that. She had chopped the snake's head off. She'd bring this out with these little ladies sitting around having tea, and they
Did
would
you
all.
say she bit off the snake's head with her bare teeth?
No, no, she bit off my head sometimes, but no, she chopped that. She knew how to hoe cotton and do other kinds of things
Yeah,
out there in the
yeah.
fields and all that. And she wasn't fooling around with a big snake like that. She would just go
Yeah,
out and, she didn't call for some man to do that work for her because she
yeah,
was jumping up on a table and all that. She
yeah.
was taking care of business.
Country women, there's
Well, yeah,
something
she was
like
not
that.
looking for a hero to handle
Yeah,
things for her. That's the
yeah,
world I grew up in, and that's the world I like. I
yeah.
like people to take their own responsibility for things, and I think everybody can do it all. But
Mm.
anyway, I'm just saying there is a living example. There were plenty of examples like that in my childhood of those kinds of things. You can understand why that might become a myth or that might become an act of imagination. And so now you were talking about now, if you're a Freudian and doing the Jungian word association test, what are you going to say to snake?
Sex.
Yes, you're going to say sex.
But
That's
I'd
the
say sex
concept.
to just about everything if I was a Freudian.
Well, of course. Okay. That's another form of monotheism. You see, the sexual monotheism, and Jung talks about that in Memories, Dreams, Reflections as well. He says
Mm,
that's Freud's hidden God. He
mm,
replaced Yahweh with sex and didn't really understand that that's what he had done. And
mm.
that's one of the tragedies of Freud. So I'm just saying, yes, sex is one of the answers to snake. And then one of the answers is evil or devil, like if you're into the Bible and that sort of thing, or the Quran, it's that kind of thing means Satan. Whether it's the beginning of the Bible or the end of the Bible, it's that snake means that it's a very negative thing. Okay, and then the third one in your favorite Indian, your Hindu or what is the snake over there?
Uh, it can often be a healing symbol, and
Well, you brought it. You brought no. You brought in that Asclepius thing from the
yeah,
West. That's another thing, the healing thing on the caduceus. But in the Kundalini, it's the snake is rising up to higher consciousness or to wisdom,
yeah,
right? And you even get some of that in the Bible where it says, "Be as wise as serpents and as
yeah,
harmless as doves."
yeah. I
Okay,
like
so
that.
the snake also is supposed to be wise or intelligent or smart or to have a higher consciousness.
Yeah.
Or it's supposed to be sexual or tempting or
I,
seducing.
I like that idea of wisdom because I've got a reptilian brain and I can kind of associate with that. But
Well, I bet you do.
there is some kind of instinctual wisdom sometimes represented
But
with
I'm
this. Yeah.
saying, see, that is just talking abstractly about these things. And then you're quickly over into not talking about images anymore. You're talking about symbols or concepts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
James Hillman and Jung does all that. He
It's
calls
like
it similar.
forget this stuff,
Jung
and
called
stay close to the image. Is that what they're saying?
Jung called his book Symbols of Transformation, and as far as I'm concerned, he shouldn't have.
Mm.
And if I was in control of the collected works, if I was running the printing presses these days, I would retitle it Images of Transformation. I would not have symbols in there because but then we're getting into what will have to be at some point part two here, which
I,
will be a whole other conversation. But I'm saying that if what James and Carl are talking about here is when they're talking about sticking to the image, they're talking about sticking to specifics, to details, to nuances, to
yeah.
subtleties, to the actual concrete presentation of the
Yeah.
image. As James says, it comes in its sure shape. The image comes in its sure shape. It's not an abstraction. It's not just any old snake up on the wall, like an abstraction. It is a very particular snake with particular qualities and action capacities in your dream. It's
Yeah.
doing this or not,
Yeah.
you know, or it's up to no good,
Yeah.
or you are imagining things about it which are it's not doing anything except you're running in the other direction. It
Yeah.
hasn't done anything to
Yeah.
make you worry about it. It's just lying there, and
Yeah.
yet you are in your dream. Oddly enough, you're running in the other direction. You just see it and you run.
Yeah.
Now, what's that about?
Mm.
And so it's not just any old snake or snake in general. It's a cobra or it's a boa constrictor, and a
Yeah.
boa constrictor is going to squeeze you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't deal
Yeah.
with you with the venom,
Yeah.
okay, and it doesn't have a rattle to warn you, and
Yeah.
so you need to pay attention to the distinctive qualities and action capacities of the image as it comes to you in your own personal experience.
Yeah.
See, otherwise you're getting abstract and you're doing something that
Yeah.
Jung and Hillman are both they have a problem with.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to finish, Michael. But I am very interested with, uh, you know, taking up that further part of this with you, because, this is just one other little aside. I mean, one thing I love about Jung and Hillman is they talk in images too, and I find those images to be very powerful. Whereas sometimes when I read psychology, which is conceptual or whatever, and a little bit abstract, I find it hard to read, But so anyway, to go to me, it would be the next part of this conversation is about images and then about conceptual thinking and what is symbols and to distinguish between these. I find that's a really
Well, there are some terrible
worthwhile.
consequences. There's some terrible consequences if people substitute symbols for images or concepts for images or words for images
Yeah,
or objects for images because
yeah,
they are not the same thing.
yeah,
And the Jungian way, I'm arguing, is to stick with the images
yeah,
and not convert them into these other things.
yeah,
To be very, very careful about what you're doing. That there's
yeah,
a method here, is what I'm saying, embedded in all of these um, statements that
yeah,
these people make. There
mm,
is an actual Jungian technique here for working with images.
yeah,
And if you're doing certain things and you think you're working with symbols or concepts or something else, this is not what Jung and Hillman mean by working with images. So that I think that might be very useful to people of a great practical value.
Well, you've scared me, and I'm going to be very careful for the rest of the day in terms of how I speak about these things. So, but no, it's very rich and very important. So thank you very much once again for sharing.
Okay, well, I look forward to having part two with you at some point.
Yeah.
Okay.